If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
When 2017 hits, it'll be a brand new era for the Missouri General Assembly. And House Speaker Todd Richardson has an ambitious agenda for how to proceed. The Poplar Bluff Republican joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I think that is fair to
As
say.
I say, hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
colleague Joe Mannies.
And joining us in Jefferson City after what I would assume was a marathon commute on Friday, from what I saw on social media, we have as our special guest.
This is Todd Richardson, Speaker of the House.
Is it true that you were trying to get back to Poplar Bluff on Friday through an ice storm, or were my eyes deceiving me on social media?
Your eyes did not deceive you. What's normally about a 2.5 hour trip took me 10.5 hours. So I left West County at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and it was well into the next morning before I got home. It was a great trip.
Oh wow! Yeah, it took me 3 hours to get from St. Charles to Webster.
I made it home safely, which I was thankful for. So it was a slow go, though, for sure.
We are thankful you made it back too, but we are not here to talk about your endless commute. We are here to talk about the new reality in the Missouri House and Senate with incoming Republican Governor Eric Greitens. So I'll just start it off with that. This will be the first time under your speakership or any recent speakership that the legislature and the governor are of the same party. I know from talking with you right after the election that you were tremendously excited about this opportunity, but there's also a great deal of expectation that the Republicans are basically in charge of everything now, and if they don't do a good job, the voters are going to make them pay a price. So with those differing dichotomies, what's kind of your feeling going into 2017?
Well, I think we're incredibly optimistic and still really excited about the opportunity that's in front of us. We have the opportunity now to impart some long-lasting positive change on Missouri, which is why a lot of us ran for office in the first place. And it's a unique opportunity, as you noted. It's not been an opportunity that Republicans have had very often in this state. Only 4 years since Republicans took the majority have they been able to have a Republican governor to work with, and so. We're really excited about the possibilities, and we're also mindful of that big responsibility that comes with it. And I think Missourians wanted to see a different government than they had. That's why the results of the election were the way they were. So we're going to be mindful of that, and we're going to be working hard every day when the session starts to make sure we deliver on those expectations.
Now, have you talked to Governor-elect Greitens? I know you weren't necessarily knew him that well before the election. Just interested in what interchange you've had with him and.
Yeah, we've been meeting and speaking on a regular basis now. I think for the last 3 weeks we've had good in-person meetings here in Jeff City, and they're working very hard on the transition, and we're working really hard to try to get the legislature ready to go on the 4th of January. So the interaction's been very good, and it's been very positive.
Well, one of the interesting things about this is even though you all are from the same party, we have a governor from St. Louis for the first time in decades, the same time we have the legislative leaders who are from outstate. Do you think that rural-urban thing is going to play in at all to some of the deliberations going forward?
I don't think so, and I don't think so because a lot of the challenges and a lot of the needs are very similar in both areas of the state. Whether we're talking about economic development or public safety or reforming entitlement programs, those are just as much an issue in rural Missouri as they are in the St. Louis area. So I think we're going to find a lot of common ground in dealing with those areas. I'm really encouraged to see the governor-elect place such an importance on public safety, which I think is an important issue for us to try to tackle. So I think we're going to find more common ground on those issues. I don't expect a big rural-urban divide again.
Public safety was a big emphasis in the gubernatorial campaign, both in the Republican primary and in the general election. And I'm just curious what the state government can do to really battle what I see are local crime and public safety issues in St. Louis and Kansas City and elsewhere. Is there funding or state assistance that they can provide to deal with the problem? Or is it also going to take more than just beefing up the amount of police? It's also going to take dealing with economic disparities, educational disparities, and those types of things.
No question about it. And I think there are some things that people would see more directly in the public safety realm. But to your point, Jason, we're going to have to get at the root of some of these problems. And the root of the problems is poverty on a widespread basis. It's a lack of good educational opportunities, and really some communities that have lost a sense of hope. And when people start to lose that sense that things can get better, and with hard work and diligence you can build a better life for yourself, you start to see some of the kinds of public safety challenges that we've got. So listen, the first and foremost, we're going to be a General Assembly, and I know the governor-elect is going to be a governor who stands with law enforcement, who has their back every single day as they're out trying to keep us safe. But we're also going to be serious about addressing the education and the workforce challenges that plague some of those communities as well.
Are there anything specific that you're talking about here?
Well, I think there are two pieces of legislation that we'll work on right out of the gate. One is a blue alert system, which is a system that works similar to an amber alert when you have an officer involved incident. And the other is to look at what our penalties are for people who commit violence against a law enforcement officer. And I know those are two things the governor-elect has talked about. Those are two things that some of our members have worked on in the past. And so those are two things I think you'll see very, very early out of the legislature in terms of kind of some pro-public safety agenda. But as it relates to, the sort of underlying factors of what's happening in these places, we're going to take a hard look at education reform again. And we've worked on these issues repeatedly, but expanded access to good educational opportunities, particularly in some areas where our school districts have not been getting the job done, I think is important.
Are you referring maybe to vouchers or other things to help private schools in this, or do you or is this more about strengthening the public?
Well, I think
system?
It's both, and I think the more kind of focused, we'll first look at how we continue to expand the charter school network and the network of good charter schools that are operating in the state. But at the end of the day, we want our public school systems to be better as well. So we're looking forward to the chance to work with those partners and find some ways we can strengthen what they're doing and their record of success.
I was thinking about that as well, because for as long as I've been covering the legislature, whenever the legislature has tried to pass anything that's either purported to be or derided as vouchers, like tuition tax credits or whatnot, they either didn't have enough legislators to pass that, or they had a governor like Jay Nixon who vetoed it. Now you have Eric Greitens, who's on record as being more open-minded on this issue. Even if there is opposition within your caucus, do you see there being a better pathway to get some quote-unquote school choice things across the finish line and signed into law?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I think education reform has a better chance of becoming law more broadly now than it ever has. And it's, they're complicated and complex issues, and we want to make sure we get them right. But, my sense is that we're going to have a strong partner in Governor Greitens to work with on those issues. And I'm really optimistic that for the first time in a long time, there'll be some substantive reform done.
When I was monitoring Twitter a few weeks ago, I saw that you made a speech expressing support for paid family leave. Now, I know that this is a big issue for a lot of working families throughout the state. It's an issue that typically Democrats have championed, but in the back of my mind, I always thought this could be something that Republicans get behind because there's an economic development component to it. So I wanted you to just lay out why you support it and what you think would be the legislative framework to making it happen.
Well, it's an issue that actually Republicans in the legislature have worked on for the last couple of years, and to your point, it is an economic development issue. When you have employees that are facing really seminal life events, whether it's the birth or adoption of a child or the death of a family member, it's very, very difficult to not need some time off of work. And if you're not being paid for that time off, it's very difficult to keep the job. And so, there's good statistics that show that by allowing some measure of paid family leave, that you can reduce the need for people to go on public assistance by as much as 30 or 40%. And so that's something that I think is very attractive when we start trying to look at how we keep people in good family supporting jobs. But what we're going to start with on the question of paid family leave, and it's probably not the only thing we're going to consider, but we're going to go back to making sure that this is a benefit that's available to all state workers. And I really think it's important for the state, if we're going to talk about the importance of this policy, to lead by example. And to make that a benefit that's available to state employees.
So you're talking about doing something as far as for state employees, as opposed to making a blanket policy for private industry. So is the idea to, by example, encourage private industry to follow suit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we're going to start, and we really want to use that as a starting point for a broader conversation about, what that policy needs to be. And it's a bill that the House passed via amendment last year, and so we'll come back to that. But I don't think that's where the end of the discussion happens either. I think we're going to continue to try to make the case for why this is good policy, and why we think it makes sense for every Missouri employee.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was health care. So even though Congress is going to decide what they're going to do with Obamacare, but there's going to be fallout on the states. I've seen some figures in the last few days that if the ACA is repealed, even though Missouri doesn't have its own marketplace, a lot of Missourians have been using the federal marketplace. There have been estimates that about up to 500,000 Missourians could end up all of a sudden without health care. And, of course, you've got the pressure on the rural hospitals already, dealing with the Medicaid issue, which is now probably defunct. So my question is, how is the General Assembly going to deal with this if all of a sudden you have hundreds of thousands of Missourians who don't have health care all of a sudden when you're trying to deal with other issues?
Yeah, well, healthcare is a humongous challenge, and it's a challenge in every state right now with a lot of uncertainty, depending on how and when Congress does their ACA repeal. But I fundamentally believe that when you allow more freedom and choice in the marketplace, you're going to create cheaper and better options for people to have health care. And so for our part, we're very, very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions. Nobody wants people to be without health care, and nobody wants people to be without access to affordable health care. The question really comes down to how do we achieve that? And when you see the kind of growth that was happening in ACA plans, the kind of price growth that was happening with those plans, I'm not sure how long that model was going to be sustainable. As it relates to Medicaid specifically, we're going to have to find some ways to bend the cost curve with Medicaid. Medicaid spending grows every single year. It's up, generally faster than the rate of growth in the economy. And so we're going to have to find some ways to deliver the services that we're delivering today, but do them in a more cost-effective manner. So the good thing is that I think there's going to be a lot of state-level innovation that's happening in the area of healthcare. And that innovation, that was really stifled over the last, 6 or 7 years because we had an administration that in Washington that you couldn't work with. We're optimistic that we're going to have an administration in Washington now that we can work with. And I'm confident that if we go to work on it, we can deliver a really innovative Medicaid program that provides good, high-quality care, but also does it at a lower cost.
Going back to paid family leave for a second, if you do expand it into the private sector, would that be something that the legislature would pass a bill saying businesses have to provide X number of weeks for paid family leave and the state will reimburse the cost or have a mechanism to make the cost more affordable for businesses? How logistically are you thinking that would work at this point?
We're going to take a look at that, Jason. I mean, nothing firm has been decided there. We're going to look at some other states that try to do this well, and that's why I say I think the issue happens in multiple steps. I think the first step is to have the state leading by example and making sure that benefit's available for state employees, and then how we achieve the rest of it is something that's a bit of an open question at this point.
Now, the other issue that I think is going to come up almost immediately is right to work, which, Joe, could you just explain what right to work is?
Okay, right to work is when there's a law that bars employers or unions from requiring all workers in a bargaining unit to pay fees or dues.
Now, I think it's almost a fait accompli at this point that this is going to pass the legislature now that you don't need the veto-proof majority anymore. Is that a fair assessment that this could actually be passed in the first couple of months, or do you think there could be a longer, drawn-out process?
No, I anticipate it won't be a long, drawn-out process. Listen, this is something that's been a priority for both the House and the Senate for a number of years now. It was a priority for the governor-elect. He spent a lot of time on the campaign trail talking about it. And so I think right to work, along with a range of other issues, will be part of an early session agenda, and I anticipate they'll move pretty quickly.
Now, one of the issues has been, aside from timing, is how broad it will be. And is this something that it's going to be dealing just with future contracts? Do you envision it's going to be also retroactive for current contracts? I've had some labor people say there may be lawsuits if it is retroactive, and also paycheck protection, which is kind of the deal for public employees. Is there going to be something with that? I'm just curious how you're going to, what you envision at this point the product looking like when it gets to the House floor.
Well, we've got a number of different versions of right to work that have been filed, and we've got multiple versions of paycheck protection that have been filed. And so part of our early session process and making sure that our committees work through exactly those issues. They consider the constitutionality of it. But what we want at the end of the day is a really strong right to work bill to hit the House floor that's appropriately address the legal and the constitutional challenges. And I'm confident that our members can get there. What you've seen in states that have passed full-blown right to work is you've seen pretty dramatic economic recovery in a lot of those places. And so we're very mindful of the experience that's happened in Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin, along with states that have had right to work for a long time. And the interesting thing, about right to work as a policy has been that you see some of the fastest growing rates of union membership in right to work states. So we think it puts the state in a more competitive posture than it's been to compete for manufacturing jobs. And I'm confident that we'll get a version to the floor early, and I'm confident that version will be right.
Now, will you be looking at the prevailing wage soon as well, or not?
Yeah, it's an issue we look at every single year and look at how we deliver state projects and government projects in a cost-effective manner. And I don't think anybody is for just lowering wages, but when you look at how that prevailing wage gets set in some parts of the state, most people would tell you it's not a real accurate reflection of what the prevailing wage actually is. So there's a number of ideas on kind of how you get at that, but I anticipate that'll be something that we'll be taking a look at as well. Okay,
tax credits, which had been something that had been big on Nixon's agenda and on some Republican leaders' agenda, was trying to curb the state tax credits. Greitens obviously, he's on a learning curve on some of that stuff.
I haven't heard him say much about tax credits, but continue.
Exactly. John. Well, that's why I'm bringing it up. So do you have any thoughts on what the General Assembly might do on that this year, or is that something that's going to be dealt with down the road once Greitens gets more familiar with it?
Well, I think it's something that we obviously want to work with the governor-elect on and get the policy to the right place. But I think our tax policy more generally is certainly something that's going to be on the agenda, and what is in the toolbox in terms of economic development tools, be they tax credits or other things, is certainly something that's going to be a part of the conversation. I think what we're going to focus on in the early part of session, though, is how do we create the right sort of general environment that we think will spur economic growth and development. And I anticipate there'll be a lot more energy spent on that, at least in the early part of the session, than some of the more specific economic development incentives.
Well, a session or two ago, the big focus had been on changing the culture in Jeff City. And I know that had been, that's one of the reasons you ended up being Speaker. Looking at it now, and you may have some tension just within your House membership because of a case over here. What are your thoughts at this point? Do you think there's been enough done to affect the culture? Do you think there's more that needs to be done? Is there anything specific that's going to be done this session, or is that another issue that may end up being down the road?
I think it's an issue that we're going to continue to focus on, and I've always viewed this mission as sort of a process that we were going to keep driving towards as long as I'm the Speaker, and I'm pleased with the progress that we've made. undertaking an effort to revamp our internship program, to completely overhaul our sexual harassment policies in the House with real consequences, real teeth, real training for our members and staff, is something that I'm proud we were able to get done. We were also able to move the ball down the field on ethics reform last year, and I'm pleased with that. But we're not finished with that effort at all. And so, as I said at the end of session last year, we're going to continue our focus on trying to eliminate lobbyist gifts. It's going to be one of the very early bills out of the House again, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to actually get something across the finish line and signed into law. And we're also going to continue the process of trying to create the right kind of environment, to lead by example here in the House. I think it was an important issue for us to take on, and we're not gonna stop with our focus on those issues.
You might have heard me furiously typing on my phone. It's because I was looking up a press release from your Democratic counterparts. Now, obviously, the Democrats are in the super minority, but I have a press release in front of me that says that they want to ban all lobbyist gifts. They want to expand the so-called revolving door, I guess, from 1 year to 2 years. They want to do a lot of things that even the Republican governor-elect wanted to do. So it seems to me like there may actually be a lot of unanimity between the parties in the House. The problem has been getting some of these ideas through the Senate, where there's a lot more opposition. Is that kind of your sense too, or could you expect some of these ideas to face some pushback?
Well, I mean, look, I think the first thing I'll say, somewhat sarcastically and somewhat tongue-in-cheek, is I'm glad to see the Democrats supporting the agenda we laid out on ethics reform at the beginning of the last session. But look, these are important issues for the House, and they have been. What their ultimate fate is in the Senate is a little hard for me to predict at this point. But I do sense more openness and opportunity to get something across the line on those issues than we've had in the past. And so we're going to try to put this bill over in the Senate very early. We're going to go work, individually with senators to try to get this bill across the finish line. And I'm confident at the end of the session that we will have some more forward momentum and some more progress in the area of ethics reform.
Every time we talked about ethics reform in the past few years, often our question would be, what about campaign donation limits? Well, we're not going to ask that question now, because there has been a constitutional amendment, Amendment 2 as it's called, that has instituted donation limits for now. We don't know what the court is going to do. I think I've heard, though, even from Democrats and even some Republican supporters, that there are elements of Amendment 2 which they don't feel go far enough. Like, it doesn't cover local elections. There have been manners and scenarios that have been outlined that they could be, circumvented or whatnot. And I guess from the other end of the spectrum, there are just some people that don't believe philosophically in Amendment 2's curbing of donation limits. Knowing that it's a constitutional amendment and you don't have a huge amount of power to pass statutes, is there anything on that front that you could see in reaction to that amendment being done?
Well, I think, Jason, it's a little bit of an open question at this point, and some of it, does depend on what the outcome of the litigation is going to be. But, making sure we have a fair and open and transparent campaign finance system is certainly something we want to have. And, there are a number of issues, a number of questions that seem to have been left unaddressed by Amendment 2. And so, to the extent that there's an opportunity to clarify some of those things and make sure we have a workable system, I think we'll certainly be open to that. But I do think it's going to take a little time to figure out exactly what sort of universe we're operating in within Amendment 2 to identify what, if anything, needs to be done there.
I've been talking to some officials in both parties about what this does as far as political parties. The party structure, which had been more powerful under campaign donation limits than afterwards, because the money, without campaign donation limits, the money was just going directly to candidates. Without getting into the philosophical issues, okay, this on some level appears to restore the prominence of political parties. I'm interested in your take, with some restrictions. I'm interested in your take on that. Is this going to, maybe the legislators won't be so busy raising money during session because they're going to be expecting the parties to do it? I'm just interested in your thoughts, how might change some things during this session.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Joe, that anybody really knows what the answer to that is. And you rightly point out there has been, a decline in the influence of party committees for a long time in the United States. And I'm not sure that this one amendment is going to completely reverse that trend. The ability for candidates and committees to communicate directly with voters now and not having to sort of rely on a party apparatus to do that has changed things pretty dramatically. I do think Amendment 2 will put some of the need for state party committees back in place, but whether it's dramatically changing what that relationship is between candidates and state parties, I think it's a little too early to say.
I want to shift gears a little bit to something that was breaking over the news wire a few hours ago. As I'm sure that you know, the Missouri Development Finance Board is looking to approve tax credits for a proposed soccer stadium in St. Louis. It's crazy that we're talking about this again, because a year ago we were talking about a proposed football stadium in St. Louis that obviously people aren't talking about much anymore because it was a failure. But I think that the wrinkle here is, and I noticed this from looking at the board's membership, that board is operating with a membership of people on expired terms, which means when as soon as he gets into office, Eric Greitens could basically turn that board into dominated by his appointees. And the governor-elect just put out a statement saying that he's opposed to this project, which purportedly means, if you put two and two together, if these tax credits were passed after he was inaugurated and he changed the composition of the board, they wouldn't end up passing. And that may be why they're trying to pass it so quickly right now with Nixon appointees on this board. So that's a little bit of a convoluted backdrop. But with that as a backdrop, do you have any concerns about the way this process is going, that they may be trying to approve these tax credits before Greitens gets in, and he has the potential to basically kill tax credits for this proposal?
I think the governor-elect ought to have the opportunity to make his appointments before this decision's rushed through. Whatever you think about the outcome of the process, rushing it through to prevent the governor-elect from having his people on the board, I think is a mistake. So I would hope that they wouldn't do that and give him the opportunity to make those appointments and make sure that people have plenty of time to vet the project.
Could there be any legislative fallout from this? I've heard rumblings from certain senators that they may want to get rid of the Missouri Development Finance Board or really change the way it doles out these tax credits, because there have been other tax credits that have been given to prior sports-related developments before. If something like this happens, could you see a legislative impact?
I don't think there's any question. I mean, I think to your point, this is the second year in a row that we've been talking about these types of credits being issued, and a lot of legislative opposition to them. So I don't think there'd be any question that there's going to be a desire for the legislature to review how those projects get awarded and what the limits of the money available for MDFB are.
Do you have any personal thoughts about this whole proposal?
Well, I guess I'd say it this way. I'm a big fan of Major League Soccer, Joe. I'm a big fan of sports in St. Louis. I'm not a huge fan of publicly financing stadiums. And that was consistent with the approach we took on the Rams Stadium last time. I think projects of this magnitude deserve to have a full legislative vetting before you commit the state to millions of dollars in long-term debt. And so that's the general default position. Now, I've not spent any time looking specifically at the proposal that's available, because I don't think there are a whole lot of specifics on the MLS proposal. Keep in mind, we're talking about an expansion team that might be awarded in the second round of expansion teams. The first round of expansion teams for MLS hasn't even been awarded yet, and St. Louis, if in that mix at all, would be in the second round. So. That's been my general and consistent approach on publicly financed stadiums. Not a big fan of them, and I think if we're even going to consider them, they need to go through a full-blown legislative process.
And just to give our listeners a little bit of background, St. Louis is competing in a mix of about 10 cities. They're going to pick 2 teams next year, and the expansion fee is $150 million. They're going to pick 2 teams the following year The expansion fee is unknown, so it could be $175, $200 million. We don't know. And, competition for those slots are pretty fierce between other cities, and I think this stadium proposal could be pretty key of whether St. Louis gets it or not.
Beyond this, are there any particular other issues that you think are going to be coming up that maybe either people hadn't been on people's minds or your minds before the election, but now are? Anything in particular?
Well, I think some things that have been talked about and we should expect include a whole universe of tort reform and litigation reform that we want to do very early. And I think, as you look overall at what this early session agenda is going to look like, it's going to be very heavily focused on trying to create the kind of economic environment that we think will allow Missouri's economy to grow at a faster pace than it is today, to allow wages to grow at a faster rate than they are today. And so I anticipate that'll be a big part of the agenda. The other thing that we're going to spend some time really focusing on is workforce development. And it's an issue that's, not overly partisan, but it's an issue where I think Missouri can really distinguish itself as a leader in the country in terms of how we're doing workforce development. And it's a critical issue both economically. It's a critical issue for dealing with some of the poverty and the education and the public safety challenges we talked about earlier. So I'm excited about the prospect and the possibility on that front as well.
Now, when you refer to workforce development, can you be a bit more specific, like an example of what you're talking about?
I think it's if you look across Missouri, there is a huge need right now for people with skills across the skills spectrum. We have a huge need for welders in certain parts of the state. We have a huge need for engineers in certain parts of the state. So how do we create the kind of education system that's delivering what the workforce needs in terms of skill sets across that spectrum? And how do we make sure that we have available the sort of customized job training that a lot of employers rely on? And Missouri has a customized job training program. It's not a program that a lot of people think works as efficiently as it should. So what we want to do is really look at the overall issue of workforce development in a comprehensive fashion. We know we have the assets and the institutions in the state to be able to deliver that workforce. It's just a matter of how do we get the kind of coordination and the kind of resources in place to make sure that we're delivering exactly what the workforce needs. And by extension, how we're delivering people the kinds of skills that they need to get a good paying job. And so I think that's the kind of broad focus that we're going to take. And it's probably going to take us a couple of steps to get there, but I think it's a huge opportunity for the state of Missouri.
Well, it seems like every session the social issues come up, at least in the second half. And so I'm talking about abortion, guns, gay rights, that sort of thing. Do you envision a particular legislation coming up in that regard, or is that something that may not be as high a profile?
Well, our first priority, as I said, is going to be to focus on creating the right kind of economic environment. But this is still a pro-life, pro-Second Amendment legislature. And so to the extent that there are things we think we can do that add protections for life or further protect the Second Amendment, then we'll consider them. But the first thing we're going to focus on is creating the right kind of environment here in Missouri to really have an economic transformation in the state. And there's a whole lot of work that has to be done there, and that's why you're going to see us prioritize that stuff at the very early session.
For the last question that I have before we let you go, and this is the question I guess we ask all of our guests who are hitting term limits. This is going to be your last term in the Missouri House. A lot of speculation about what you're going to do next besides, driving back to Poplar Bluff and buying Christmas presents for your family. Have you given any thought about what you're going to do, if anything, in 2018? I mean, there are a couple of statewide offices which will be up for election. If you want to announce this on this show, we would be eternally grateful.
We could set up a big tease, and you guys could probably get a few extra people to download the episode. But Jason, I'm focused. Yes. I'm focused right now on the job in front of us, which is, to be the Speaker of the House and to help be a part of leading this legislature to enact some good policies for the state. And so, we are just a few weeks removed from the last election cycle. So I'm going to stay focused on the job that my caucus and my constituents elected me to do for now. And we'll have plenty of time to think about what, if anything, happens in 18 down the road.
There's only 750-ish days until the next election. Let's keep it that way for now. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate your time as always. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter, Jay Rosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
Jay Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
And what is your complicated Twitter handle again, Mr. Speaker?
It is very complicated. At Rep_T Richardson.
We'll be back next time. Until then, so long.
When you were young, you were the king of carrot flowers, and how you built a tower tumbling through the trees, in holy rattlesnakes that fell all around your feet.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.